how we rose from stone tools to global empires and modern technology. Long before cities, before writing, before pyramids, kings, and empires, the earth belonged to silence. The world was dominated by forests stretching across continents, massive herds of grazing animals, harsh deserts, shifting ice sheets, and untouched oceans. Humanity, at least the humanity we recognize today, did not yet exist. Before starting our story, please subscribe, like, and comment Historia Memories for more amazing history content. But around 300,000 years ago, something began to change. Deep inside the African continent, in grasslands and valleys, a new kind of creature emerged from the long chain of evolution. They walked upright. They crafted tools with purpose. They shared food, warmth, and stories by firelight. They were Homo sapiens, us. This is the story of how these early humans survived, evolved, migrated, and transformed themselves into the foundation on which all later civilizations would stand. This is humanity before civilization, before the first kingdom or city, before borders, war, religion, or trade. This is the dawn of human civilization. Origins in Africa. Humanity's story begins in East Africa, a region shaped by dramatic landscapes, volcanoes, rift valleys, lakes, and open savannas. Climate shifts brought cycles of drought and abundance. These environmental challenges forced our ancestors to become adaptable, creative, and resilient. By around 300,000 years ago, the species Homo sapiens appeared. They were not alone. The planet was shared with other humans: Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, Homo erectus across parts of Asia, Homo floresiensis on Indonesian islands, and remnants of older human species in Africa for tens of thousands of years. Homo sapiens were simply one branch on a very crowded evolutionary tree, but something set them apart. Early Homo sapiens had brains nearly identical in structure and size to ours today. More importantly, they possessed the ability to think symbolically, imagine abstract ideas, and communicate with complex language. This unlocked something extraordinary: the ability to cooperate on large scales. This single ability, shared imagination, would eventually allow humans to form tribes, nations, religions, economies, and ultimately civilizations. But in the beginning, survival was far simpler and far more difficult. Life in small bands. For most of human existence, people lived in small groups of 20 to 50 individuals. These were extended families or bands of families who hunted animals, gathered fruits and roots, and constantly moved with the seasons. Why small groups? Because mobility was life. Staying in one place too long exhausted local resources. Hunting required tracking and migration. Food spoiled quickly. Tools were minimal. Life was simple, but not easy. Daily life. A typical day for an early human band might look like this. While the sun was still low, groups split into tasks. Men often tracked game antelope, gazelles, or even elephants, using stone-tipped spears and cooperation. Women gathered edible plants, roots, berries, nuts, insects, and small animals. Children learned by observing. Elders advised with memories of past seasons, drought cycles, and safe regions. Evenings were sacred. Fire created warmth, protection, cooked food, and, just as importantly, time to think and talk. Around the fire, stories were told. Knowledge about the land was passed down. Myths were created. These fireside moments were the birthplace of human culture. The power of fire. Fire was not just a tool, it was a superpower. Humans were not the only species to use tools, but they were the only ones to truly control fire. What fire did for early humans: made food digestible, freeing more calories, strengthened social bonds during shared meals, protected against predators, extended waking hours, allowing more learning-enabled cooking, which transformed human biology. Cooked food meant softer, more energy-rich meals. Over thousands of generations, humans developed smaller teeth, shorter digestive systems, and larger brains. Fire changed the human body physically and mentally. It allowed humans to move into colder climates. It permitted nighttime storytelling, planning, and creativity. Civilization's first spark literally was fire, tool-making, and intellect. Early humans crafted stone tools long before Homo sapiens. But around 300,000 to 200,000 years ago, tool-making became more advanced, precise, and varied. Toolkits included sharp blades for cutting meat scrapers, for cleaning hide awls, for piercing skins. Wooden spears hardened in fire, later stone-tipped javelins and bone tools. These were not random or clumsy designs. They were standardized. That means humans were teaching each other, intentionally indicating structured language and planning. Tools allowed humans to hunt larger animals, defend themselves, and expand into new environments. But tools were only one part of humanity's growing advantage. The cognitive revolution. Something remarkable occurred between 100. First artwork, the oldest known human art abstract carvings, comes from Africa, dating between 100,000 and 70,000 years old. Early beads and ochre markings show that humans cared about symbolism and identity. This was the birth of human imagination. Migration, leaving Africa. Around 70,000 years ago, a small group of Homo sapiens, perhaps only a few thousand individuals, left Africa and began the greatest migration in human history. Why did they leave? Possibly climate shifts, search for food, following herds, curiosity and exploration. Whatever the reason, humans crossed the Red Sea into the Arabian Peninsula and spread across continents. Journey across the world. 60,000 years ago, humans reached South Asia. 50,000 years ago, they entered Southeast Asia and Australia. 45,000 years ago, they reached Europe, encountering Neanderthals. 30,000 years ago, they moved into Siberia. 20,000 to 15,000 years ago, humans crossed into the Americas. Every step required adaptation. New foods, colder climates, unfamiliar predators, and different landscapes. Along the way, humans met other hominin species. They interacted, competed on, sometimes interbred. Modern humans today still carry Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. Humanity became the first global species long before civilization began. Mastering extreme environments, reaching new continents, forced humans to evolve culturally and technologically. In Ice Age Europe, humans wore tailored clothing, built shelters from mammoth bone, and crafted advanced hunting tools. In the tropics of Southeast Asia, humans fished, built boats, and adapted to monsoon cycles. In Australia, they invented some of the world's earliest precision tools, such as the boomerang, and used fire to shape the landscape. In the Arctic, later, humans developed insulated clothing, sleds, and specialized hunting methods for seals and caribou. Humans became the most adaptable species ever to live. The rise of culture and spirituality. As humans spread, their beliefs and cultures diversified. Spiritual thinking, burial sites with grave good stools, pigments, beads, suggest that humans believed in an afterlife. Myth and memory. Stories were used to explain nature, the sky, the moon, fire, storms, animals. These myths unified groups and created identities. Artistic expression. In caves around Africa and later Europe, humans painted animals, hunting scenes, and mysterious symbols. These were not decorations, they were messages, lessons, rituals, or early forms of communication. Megafauna and survival. Humans hunted mammoths, giant bison, woolly rhinoceros, massive kangaroos, and giant sloths, but they also gathered plants, nuts, seeds, roots, and insects. Most of their calories came from gathering. Human survival required observation, cooperation, memory strategy, adaptability. Bands shared food and resources. Conflict existed, but large-scale warfare had not yet begun. There were no armies, no wealth inequality, no kingdoms. Leadership was based on age, skill, and respect of inherited power. This was humanity before hierarchy. The end of an era. By 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were on every habitable continent except Antarctica. They had formed networks of families, cultures, and early traditions. They were shaping landscapes with fire and tools. They understood patterns of nature, migration of animals, and seasonal cycles. Humanity was ready for its next great transformation. The hunter-gatherer, world flexible, mobile, egalitarian, would soon give birth to something entirely different: permanent settlements, agriculture, cities, kingdoms, and eventually civilizations. A world on the edge of transformation. By 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had spread across the world. For tens of millennia, humans remained master survivors, nomads who moved with the rhythm of seasons, wind, rainfall, and migrating herds. This lifestyle had shaped our bodies, families, and cultures. The world was vast, and humans were few. But as ice sheets expanded and contracted, as climates shifted violently, and as human populations grew slowly, pressures began to mount. Something had to change. And in different parts of the world, separated by oceans, deserts, and mountains, humans began experimenting, innovating, and adapting. Unknowingly, they were building toward the single most important transformation in human history: the agricultural revolution. This revolution would give birth to villages, surplus food, population growth, social classes, religion, trade, writing, and eventually kingdoms and empires. But this monumental shift did not begin suddenly. It was the result of thousands of years of tiny innovations and observations, gradually reshaping the human way of life. To understand the birth of civilization, we must explore how humans went from moving constantly to staying still. The Ice Age shapes humanity. For much of the last 50,000 years, Earth was locked in the final stages of the Pleistocene Ice Age. Massive ice sheets covered North America, Northern Europe, and parts of Asia. Sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than today, exposing land bridges such as Beringia between Siberia and Alaska, the Sunda Shelf, connecting Southeast Asian islands, land routes across the Persian Gulf basin. These lower sea levels allowed human migration to reach remote continents. But the Ice Age also created hardships. Climate pressures intensified long droughts, devastated landscapes. Glacial cold reduced plant growth, herds migrated farther. Competition with Neanderthals and large predators increased. Human groups had to become more efficient at planning, conserving resources, and creating complex tools. These pressures shaped the human mind, teaching early people how to anticipate future scarcity, an essential step before agriculture. Hunting innovations. By 45,000 years ago, humans invented spear throwers, atlatls, composite weapons, heavier-duty blades, fishhooks, early nets. These tools made hunting and fishing far more effective and stable. But stability had consequences. Human populations slowly began to rise, and rising populations meant humans needed more reliable food sources. The Ice Age forced humans to innovate, setting the stage for humanity's greatest shift. The beginning of planned food. Long before farming existed, humans unintentionally reshaped ecosystems, controlled burning in Africa, Australia, and parts of the Americas. Early humans burned forests to encourage the growth of edible plants and attract grazing animals. This was environmental engineering, thousands of years before the idea existed. Selective gathering. Hunter-gatherers began favoring the most productive plants, grasses with larger seeds, nuts with thinner shells, plants that regrow quickly after harvesting. By repeatedly gathering certain species, humans altered their distribution. Over centuries, the plants humans liked most began to spread more widely near campsites. Animal familiarity. Humans tracked herds across seasons. Over generations, they understood which animals returned to the same feeding grounds, had predictable births, were less aggressive, could be herded into natural enclosures. This knowledge built slowly would become the foundation of animal domestication. Humans were not yet farmers, but they were learning to shape nature, one season at a time. The last hunter-gatherer golden age. It is easy to romanticize the distant past, but evidence suggests that tribal hunter-gatherers lived healthier, more balanced lives than many early farming communities. Their diets were rich in meats, fruits, vegetables, nuts, roots, insects. This variety prevented malnutrition and encouraged physical fitness. Workload. Most hunter-gatherers worked 3 to 6 hours per day. The rest of their time was devoted to rest, storytelling, spiritual rituals, and social bonding. Social structure. Society was egalitarian. Little property, few possessions, decisions made collectively. Gender roles existed, but were flexible. Elders were respected. Repository of memory. The lack of fixed settlement prevented long-term accumulation of wealth, so inequalities remained relatively small. Community bonds. Living in small groups strengthened cooperation. Food was shared. Children were cared for by all. Conflicts resolved through group discussion or separation for tens of thousands of years. This lifestyle was sustainable. But as the Ice Age ended, around 12,000 years ago, everything changed. Temperatures rose, ice melted, rainfall patterns shifted, forests spread, animals migrated, and humans suddenly had access to more plants, more animals, and more stable environments. This transition opened the door for a revolutionary discovery. The first experiments in agriculture. Agriculture did not appear in one place or at one time. It emerged independently in multiple regions. The Fertile Crescent. Middle East. Wheat, barley, lentils. China, millet, rice. New Guinea, taro, bananas, sugarcane. Africa, sorghum, yams. Mesoamerica, maize, squash, beans. South America, potatoes, quinoa, llamas. This simultaneity shows a simple truth. The world was ready for agriculture, but the earliest steps were tiny. Accidental planting. Humans noticed seeds sprouting where they slept, plants regrowing where they discarded remains, certain soils producing more food, floodplains being naturally fertile. People began intentionally scattering seeds near seasonal camps. The earliest planted fields were small and mixed nothing like modern farms, storing food once humans harvested more food than they could eat in a day. They developed clay-lined pits, animal skin bags, early pottery. This food surplus was tiny at first, but it changed everything. Surplus meant staying longer in one place, raising more children, growing populations, creating more permanent shelters. The agricultural revolution had quietly begun. The first domesticated animals around 15,000 to 10,000 BCE. Humans began forming partnerships with animals that would transform the world. Dogs were likely the first domesticated animal. Wolves that scavenged near human camps gradually grew less fearful. Humans benefited from early warning alarms, companionship, and hunting help. Dogs were humanity's earliest allies. Sheep and goats domesticated in the Fertile Crescent. They provided milk, wool, meat bones. For tools, they were easy to herd and manage. Cattle stronger, more powerful, and eventually used for plowing heavy labor. Milk leather cattle became essential to large farming communities. Pigs, domesticated in Asia and Europe. Pigs turned waste into food efficiently. Chickens, originating in Southeast Asia. Chickens spread worldwide for eggs and meat. The domestication of animals made farming exponentially more productive and reliable. Permanent settlements begin with reliable crops and domesticated animals. Humans needed to move less. Villages emerged in many parts of the world. Nachafian culture, the first semi-settled people, around 12,500 BCE in the Levant, modern Israel, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. The Natufians began living in semi-permanent stone houses. They harvested wild wheat and barley using sickles and stored grain in pits. They were still hunter-gatherers, but now they had larger populations, distinct shelters, social rituals, stone-built family homes. The Natufians represent the transition between nomadic life and true farming. Göbekli Tepe, the first temple, one of humanity's greatest archaeological surprises, lies in Göbekli Tepe, in modern-day Turkey, dating to around 9600 BC, before farming was fully established. Massive stone pillars, arranged in circular enclosures, decorated with carvings of animals, snakes, birds, and abstract symbols. What's remarkable? Göbekli Tepe was built by hunter-gatherers, not farmers. This discovery overturned earlier assumptions. It suggested monumental architecture came before agriculture. Religion and ritual may have inspired settlement. Large, coordinated labor forces existed long before villages. The idea that people farmed so they could build temples may be reversed. People built temples and therefore needed to organize food, leading to farming. Human culture and belief systems helped birth civilization. The agricultural revolution accelerates 10,000 to 8,000 BCE. By 10,000 BCE, agriculture was spreading rapidly in regions with rich natural plant varieties. Human populations expanded dramatically. Consequences of farming. 1. Population growth. Farming supported far more people per acre than hunting. 2. Sedentary life, year-round shelters, communal storage houses, and early public spaces. 3. Family structure changes, bigger families, multi-generational households. 4. Work intensification. Farming was hard labor. Many early farmers worked longer hours than hunter-gatherers. 5. Dietary decline. Farming reduced diet diversity. Many communities saw increases in malnutrition, dental problems, bone stress, injuries. Yet farming continued because it produced surplus, and surplus was power. Jericho and Cataluk, the first true towns. Jericho, 9000 BCE, located near the Jordan River. Jericho is one of the world's oldest continuously occupied towns. Early Jericho had mud brick houses, a massive defensive wall, a stone tower, extensive grain storage, a town of several thousand people, organized, defended, permanent. Cataluk, 7400 BCE, in Anatolia, Turkey. Cataluk was a dense settlement of 5,000 to 8,000 people. Features included roof entry houses, packed tightly wall paintings, and shrines, early trade networks, long-distance obsidian exchange. These towns prove that humans were now living in communities far larger than any hunter-gatherer band. The seeds of civilization were planted. A new world begins by 8000 BCE. Humanity had crossed a threshold. The world was no longer shaped only by nature. It was shaped by human choices. People were clearing forests, digging irrigation canals, domesticating crops, shaping landscapes, creating shared religions, developing early leadership roles, accumulating wealth, building large communities. Agriculture had set off a chain reaction that would never be reversed. Humanity was marching toward cities, kingdoms, writing law, mathematics, organized religion, monarchies, technology, empire, when humans began to build worlds. By 8000 BCE, humanity had taken its first steps into settlement, farming, herding, and ritual architecture. Villages spread across the Fertile Crescent, the Indus Valley, Egypt, and East Asia. Populations rose, surplus grew, rituals flourished. But something even more profound was about to occur. Humanity was on the brink of discovering governments, cities, taxes, writing, mathematics, architecture, specialized labor, long distance, trade, social classes. This period, the birth of civilization, would transform everything. Villages were about to become cities. Family heads were about to become kings. Storytelling was about to become written history. Civilization was awakening. Why civilization emerged? To understand why early humans created cities, we must examine the three pressures that forced humans toward complexity. 1. Population growth. Farming produced much more food than hunting. As villages expanded, disputes increased. Larger populations required systems of leadership, justice, food distribution, land division. Order became essential. 2. Surplus management. Excess grain needed storage, protection, and labor. This required administrators, record keepers, guards, builders. A chain of authority emerged. 3. Environmental challenges. Rivers flooded unpredictably. Droughts struck. Soil exhausted itself. Responding to these crises pushed communities to form irrigation networks, canals, dams, communal labor groups. To coordinate these large projects, centralized power was necessary. Civilization wasn't just an invention, it was a response to pressure. The Fertile Crescent, where cities were born. The first great civilizations emerged in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Mesopotamia, meaning between the rivers. Here, humans faced extreme environmental contrasts. Floods that destroyed fields, droughts that killed crops, dry seasons requiring irrigation-rich silt, providing high crop yields to survive. People needed strong coordination. From this struggle arose the first true cities. Cataluk, a city without streets, 75005-700 BCE, before the first kingdoms emerged. The proto-city Catalyuk in Anatolia thrived between 7500 and 5700 BCE. It was a city unlike anything today. Key features: population, 5,000 to 8,000 houses connected directly. With no streets, citizens walked on rooftops, entry through roof doors using ladders. Walls covered with murals, art, bull skulls, no central authority or palace here. Society was surprisingly egalitarian. People lived similarly across homes, with little evidence of class difference. This city demonstrates an early experiment in urban living, one that thrived without kings, armies, or writing. But this model would not survive the coming pressures of expansion. Jericho, the world's first fortified town, by around 9000 BCE. Jericho, in modern-day Palestine, was a thriving settlement built around a freshwater spring. What made Jericho remarkable? A large stone wall surrounding the town, a massive 28-foot stone tower, a population of around 1,000, early evidence of organized religion, long-distance trade in obsidian and salt. Jericho's wall suggests something new in human society: threats, defense, and territorial identity. Jericho was one of the first communities that felt the need to protect us versus them. This idea, inside versus outside, would shape later civilizations. The rise of Sumer, the first real civilization, 4500 to 3000 BCE. By 4500 BCE, in southern Mesopotamia, a revolutionary culture took shape. This land of marshes, canals, and fertile soil became the birthplace of the first cities, the first kings, the first writing, the first laws, the first schools, the first professional armies. Sumer is often called the cradle of civilization. The first cities of Sumer. The cities included Uruk, Eridu, Kish, Lagash, Nippur. These were not small towns. They were complex urban centers with populations reaching 40,000, rivaling medieval European cities thousands of years later. Urban features: monumental temples, ziggurats, bureaucratic buildings, central plazas, workshops for metal, pottery, textiles, irrigation, canals, granaries, defensive walls. Sumer was humanity's first organized experiment in large-scale urban life. Uruk, the world's first true city, 4000 to 3000 BCE. Uruk was the shining star of early civilization. At its height, around 3500 to 3000 BCE, population 40,000 to 50,000, area 6 square kilometers, massive temples to the gods, Inanna and Anu, 10-meter-high walls, trade reaching India and Egypt. Uruk was the first place where humanity experienced traffic, crowds, specialized jobs, taxation, bureaucracy, mass production, record keeping. Uruk's influence rippled across the ancient world. The invention of writing 34003100 BCE. Writing was born out of necessity, not creativity. Early farmers produced grain, dates, barley, wool. Beer administrators needed to track who owed grain, how much was stored, what workers were paid, what temples owned. So, around 3400 BCE, the Sumerians created cuneiform. At first, simple pictures and tokens tracked goods. Then tokens were pressed into clay. Then symbols replaced tokens. Then styluses replaced pictures. By 3100 BCE, writing evolved into full cuneiform script. The purpose of writing originally, accounting taxes, rations, only later did writing evolve for epic stories, kings' achievements, religious hymns, astronomy, mathematics, myths. Writing changed humanity forever. History became permanent. The emergence of kings and government cities created problems that villages never had. Crime-land disputes, food distribution, irrigation, management, trade regulation. To solve them, societies created central authority. The Lugal big man early leaders were not kings in the modern sense. They were mediators, chosen during floods, wars, famine. Over time, these temporary leaders became permanent rulers. Power concentrated. Temples became governments in Sumer. Priests controlled land temples, controlled labor temples, distributed food. Priests collected offerings gradually. Religious authority blended with political control. Civilization and religion became inseparable. Technological revolutions of this era between 8000 and 3000 BCE. Humans invented nearly every major tool of early civilization. Pottery, 7000 BCE, allowed for storing grain, transporting food, cooking trade. Painting and decoration. Metallurgy, 4500 BCE, copper tools transformed. Farming, warfare, hunting, art. The wheel, 3500 BCE, invented in Sumer. It revolutionized transport. Pottery. Construction, warfare, boats, 3500 BCE. Sumerians built the first known sailboats, enabling long-distance trade. Mathematics and astronomy, 3100 BCE. The Sumerians developed basic math, calendars, star maps, geometry. Civilization became scientific. Long-distance trade networks began. Trade routes connected early civilizations. Sumer traded textiles, grain, pottery, copper, lapis lazuli. Bitumen imports arrived from Indus Valley, Iran, Anatolia, Persian Gulf, Afghanistan, Egypt. These early trade networks laid the foundation for the Silk Road. Thousands of years later, the human cost of civilization. Civilization brought progress, but also hardship. Inequality grew for the first time. Elites accumulated wealth. Commoners served temples, and kings' slaves were taken in wars. Women's roles became restricted. Health declined. Early farmers suffered. Tooth decay, malnutrition, arthritis, shorter lifespans. Crowded cities increased. Disease, parasites, famine, risk. Civilization was powerful, but it was not gentle. The stage is set for empires. By 3000 BCE, the world was radically different from the world of nomads 50,000 years earlier. Cities filled the landscape. Writing preserved history. Kings ruled by divine authority. Trade connected continents. Bronze, weapons, advanced warfare. Temples dominated the skyline. Humanity had entered the age of civilizations. The next chapters would see Sumerian kings, Egyptian pharaohs, Indus Valley engineers, Chinese dynasties, Mesopotamian wars. The first empires. Human civilization had truly begun. Human civilization, after tens of thousands of years of slow experimentation, now surged forward with astonishing momentum. Village communities evolved into cities. Cities formed kingdoms, and kingdoms grew into empires, vast political giants with extraordinary cultural, military, and technological influence. This era, roughly between 3000 BCE and 500 CE, marks the age when humanity built monumental architectures, codified world-changing religions, wrote the earliest literature, and fought wars that determined the fate of continents. From the banks of the Nile to the valleys of the Indus, from the mountains of Peru to the islands of Greece, human beings forged the structures that would ultimately become the foundations of today's world. The birth of empires in Mesopotamia, civilization in Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, began with the Sumerians, who built city-states such as your Uruk, Lagash, and Eridu. But these city-states, though advanced, lacked unity. They competed, traded, and occasionally spilled each other's blood over farmland, canals, and divine legitimacy. Then emerged a man whose ambition unified the region, Sargon of Akkad, around 2334 BCE. Sargon conquered the Sumerian cities, forming the Akkadian Empire, often recognized as the world's first true empire. For the first time in recorded history, a single ruler governed multiple cultures. A professional standing army was maintained. A bureaucracy with tax records, governors, and standardized laws was created. Though the empire fell after barely 2 centuries, crushed by drought, rebellion, and invasion, it laid the blueprint for future imperial systems. Babylon and the rule of Hammurabi. Rising from the ashes of Akkad, the city of Babylon emerged as a new power. Under King Hammurabi, c. 1792 BCE, it became a center of law, astronomy, and literature. His famous law code carved onto basalt stela set standards for justice, trade, family life, and property. It established the legal principle that the strong might not oppress the weak. This was revolutionary, even if punishments were harsh by modern standards. The concept of predictable, written law changed civilization forever. The Age of Pharaohs. While Mesopotamia was experimenting with empires, Egypt was perfecting the idea of centralized power in spectacular fashion. The Old Kingdom and Pyramid Age. During the Old Kingdom c. 268-62181 BCE, powerful pharaohs like Djoser, Snefru, and Khufu commanded tens of thousands of laborers to build monumental structures, culminating in the Step Pyramid, the Bent Pyramid, the Red Pyramid, and the massive Great Pyramid of Giza. These pyramids were not merely tombs. They were political propaganda, religious statements, and astronomical monuments. The Middle and New Kingdoms. Egypt's power ebbed and flowed over centuries, but reached its peak during the New Kingdom 1550 to 1070 BCE, with rulers such as Hatshepsut, the great female pharaoh who expanded trade, Thutmose III, often called the Napoleon of Egypt, Akhenaten, the heretic king who introduced monotheistic Aten worship, Ramses II, the military hero immortalized in temples across Egypt. Under the New Kingdom, Egypt stretched its influence across the Levant and Nubia, becoming one of the richest, most artistically productive civilizations of the ancient world. The Indus Valley and ancient India, meanwhile, thousands of kilometers eastward, the world's most sophisticated Bronze Age civilization flourished along the Indus River, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, a civilization ahead of its time by 2600 BCE. These cities had gridded streets, standardized fired bricks, plumbing and drainage systems, water wells in nearly every home, large public baths, non-violent governance, no major weapons or palaces found, but around 1900 BCE. This civilization declined likely from climate change, river shifts, or economic collapse. Vedic India and the rise of Hindu civilization into the vacuum came Indo-Aryan cultures, eventually forming the basis of Vedic India. Over centuries, this era produced the Vedas, foundational, spiritual, philosophical texts, social structures that later evolved into caste systems, epic stories like the Mahabharata and Ramayana. By the time of the Maurya Empire, 322 to 185 BCE, India was unified under powerful rulers like Chandragupta Maurya, the empire's founder. Ashoka, the Great, who spread Buddhism across Asia. India became a center of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and spiritual philosophy. Ancient China, dynasties that shaped a continent. China's civilization, beginning along the Yellow River around 2000 BCE, followed a unique pattern of cyclical dynasties, each claiming the mandate of heaven. The Shang and Zhou dynasties. The Shang dynasty c. 1600 BCE introduced bronze weapons, oracle bone script, early Chinese writing, strong kingship, and ancestor worship. The succeeding Zhou dynasty introduced feudal governance, iron tools, philosophical giants like Confucius, Laozi, and Sun Tzu. The Warring States and the Qin Empire. Between 475 to 221 BCE, hundreds of states fought for dominance. Then, a single man ended the chaos. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, he created unified laws, unified writing, a national road system, the first version of the Great Wall. Harsh yet brilliant, he forged China's imperial identity. The Han Dynasty, after Qin's fall. The Han Dynasty, 206 BCE to 220 CE, established China as a superpower. Han China invented paper, developed advanced metallurgy, opened the Silk Road, linking China to Rome, became one of the world's largest populations. Han literature, science, and bureaucracy shaped East Asia for 2,000 years. The Mediterranean civilizations. Now we shift west to the Mediterranean region that would define the political and cultural language of the Western world. Greece, the birthplace of democracy. The rugged terrain of Greece fostered independent city-states, the most important being Athens, the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, and drama. Sparta, military society, built for endurance and discipline. Corinth, Thebes, and Miletus, centers of trade and innovation. Greek culture produced Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Sophocles, and Euripides, Euclid and Archimedes, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic era. In 336 BCE, Alexander of Macedon launched a conquest across Persia, Egypt, and India. By the age of 32, he controlled one of the largest empires in world history. The result? Greek culture fused with Eastern ideas, producing the Hellenistic era, an explosion of cosmopolitan innovation in science, art, and trade. Rome, from republic to empire. Rome began as a small settlement on the Tiber River, but over centuries, guided by senators, soldiers, and shrewd politics, the Roman Republic expanded. Civil wars tore it apart, leading to Julius Caesar's rise and assassination, the ascension of Augustus, Rome's first emperor. The Roman Empire, 27 BCE to 476 CE, became the greatest power of the ancient European world. It built roads spanning from Britain to Egypt, aqueducts and engineering marvels, legal codes that influenced modern law, cities with forums, amphitheaters, and public baths. Even when Rome fell in 476 CE, its culture lived on through the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire and the foundations of Western civilization. The Americas, civilizations of the New World across the ocean, entirely independent civilizations developed with their own monumental achievements. Olmec civilization, Mesoamerica, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica. The Olmecs, 1200 BCE, created colossal stone heads, early writing calendar systems, Maya civilization. The Maya produced advanced astronomy, highly accurate calendars, the only fully developed writing system in the Americas. Massive pyramids and cities such as Tikal and Palenque, Andean civilizations in South America. The Chavín, Nazca, and Mocha cultures thrived long before the famous Incas. They built terrace farming, giant geoglyphs, Nazca lines, complex pottery, and metallurgy. These societies were as sophisticated and technologically innovative as their old world counterparts, just on a different trajectory. Africa, beyond Egypt, Africa was not limited to the Nile civilizations. Across the continent, powerful kingdoms rose. Nubia, Kush, rivals of Egypt with iron smelting. Carthage, a Mediterranean naval superpower. Axum, Ethiopia, one of the first Christian kingdoms. Noach, creators of West Africa's earliest iron artifacts. These civilizations played major roles in ancient trade, culture, and technology. Religion, writing, and the human mind. This era also saw the rise of world religions. Hinduism in India, Judaism, from which Christianity and Islam would later arise. Zoroastrianism, influencing Abrahamic faiths. Buddhism, spreading from India across Asia. Confucianism and Taoism in China. Early philosophical traditions in Greece. Writing systems matured into powerful tools. Hieroglyphics, cuneiform Chinese logographs, Phoenician alphabet, ancestor of Greek and Latin scripts. These intellectual revolutions shaped how humans thought, governed, worshipped, and documented their world. Warfare, technology, and innovation. Empires rose through innovation. Bronze weapons gives iron weapons. Chariots gives cavalry. Armies, sailing ships gives large transport galleys. Domestication of horses and camel caravans. Early medicine in Egypt, India, and Greece. Mathematics in Sumer, Babylon, and Greece. Astronomy in Babylon, Maya, and China. Technological progress fueled expansion and destruction. Collapse and transition by 1200 BCE. Major civilizations in the Near East collapsed under mysterious circumstances known as the Bronze Age collapse. Possible causes: drought, famine, earthquakes, invasion of sea peoples, trade networks breaking down. Great powers like the Hittites and Mycenaeans vanished. But from their ashes rose new empires: Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and eventually Rome. The ancient world continued evolving until, by 500 CE, internal decline and external invasions fractured the Roman Empire, marking the symbolic end of antiquity and the beginning of the Middle Ages. Empires, faiths, and global transformations, 500 BCE to 1500 CE. The story of human civilization from 500 BCE to 1500 CE is a story of empires rising and falling, religions spreading across continents, trade networks stretching farther than ever before, and human ideas transforming societies on a global scale. It is the age of philosophers and prophets, emperors and conquerors, monks and scholars, an era when humanity connected, collided, and reshaped itself in ways that still define the modern world. This period opens in a world where major civilizations have already taken root, but the ideas and powers that will shape the next 2,000 years are just beginning to awaken. Humanity stands at the border between the ancient world and the medieval world, and nothing that comes after will remain unchanged. The Golden Age of Philosophy and Thought, 500 to 300 BCE. Around the 5th century BC, the world experienced what historians call the Axial Age, a remarkable convergence of philosophical and religious innovation across multiple civilizations. Greece, the birth of Western philosophy in Athens, Socrates challenges citizens to examine their lives. His student Plato establishes the academy, the first major institution of higher learning in the Western world. Aristotle, Plato's student, becomes perhaps the most influential thinker in human history. His writings on logic, ethics, science, metaphysics, and politics will shape civilizations for millennia. Greek thought introduces reasoning, scientific curiosity, democratic discourse, ethics as a structured system, all emerge as guiding frameworks for future societies. South Asia, the spiritual renaissance. In India, during and after the life of Gautama Buddha, Buddhism spreads philosophical ideas about suffering, enlightenment, and compassion. Jainism emphasizes strict nonviolence and spiritual discipline. Indian thought gives the world the concept of dharma, duty, order, meditation as a structured practice, metaphysics deeply interwoven with social ethics, China, Confucianism, and Taoism. In China, Confucius teaches harmony, moral leadership, and respect for tradition. His rival school, Taoism, led by Laozi, emphasizes the natural flow of the universe and simplicity in life. The Middle East, the last prophets before empire in Persia, Zoroastrianism influences future monotheistic religions with its battle between good and evil, heaven and hell, and moral accountability. The world becomes intellectually electrified, and this foundation will fuel the great empires that emerge next. Civilization enters an era defined by expansion, conquest, and cultural fusion. Alexander's conquests, 336 to 323 BCE, Alexander the Great unifies Greece and launches one of the most ambitious military campaigns in world history. In just over a decade, he conquers Persia, Egypt, and parts of India. Although Alexander dies young, his empire spreads Greek culture, language, art, and scientific thought across 3 continents. This fusion, Hellenistic civilization, creates the Library of Alexandria, advances in astronomy, mathematics, and medicine, cross-cultural trade from the Mediterranean to India. The Mauryan Empire, 322 to 185 BCE in India. Chandragupta Maurya establishes one of the largest empires in Asia, but it is his grandson, Ashoka the Great, who leaves the deepest mark. After witnessing the horrors of war, Ashoka renounces violence, embraces Buddhism, and spreads it peacefully across Asia. The Qin and Han dynasties in China, 221 BCE to 220 CE. China unifies under Qin Shi Huangdi, building the first Great Wall segments and establishing centralized governance. The Han dynasty that follows becomes one of the greatest civilizations on Earth, advancing metallurgy, papermaking, medicine, and astronomy. The Han also opened trade routes that will become the legendary Silk Road, the backbone of global commerce. Rome, 27 BCE, 2476 CE. Perhaps no empire symbolizes the ancient world better than Rome. Rome engineers roads stretching thousands of miles, aqueducts, concrete architecture, a legal system influencing governments even today at its height. The Roman Empire controls the entire Mediterranean, the Roman Lake. Rome spreads Greek philosophy, adopts Christianity, develops republican principles, and sets the foundation for Western civilization. The fall of Rome, internal decay, economic strain, and waves of migration weaken Rome, in 476 CE. The Western Roman Empire collapses, but its cultural DNA survives, becoming the seed of medieval Europe. The rise of world religions, 01 CE to 1000 CE. The next millennium becomes defined by spiritual revolutions that reshape global identity. Christianity, originating in the Roman province of Judea. Christianity grows rapidly after the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Persecuted for centuries, Christians eventually win imperial acceptance under Constantine in the 4th century. Soon after, Christianity becomes the dominant religion of Europe. By 1000 CE, Christian kingdoms dominate Europe's cultural and political landscape. Islam 7th century onward in Arabia. Muhammad begins receiving revelations in 610 CE. Within a century, Islam spreads across the Middle East, North Africa, Spain, Central Asia, and South Asia. The early Muslim world becomes a hub of scientific advancement, preserving Greek texts and pioneering algebra, optics, chemistry, medicine, navigation. Cities like Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo flourish as centers of learning. Hinduism and Buddhism in India and Southeast Asia. Temples, universities, and monasteries flourish. Nalanda University becomes one of the most advanced learning centers in the world. China and East Asia in China. Buddhism mingles with Confucianism and Taoism, creating a unique hybrid culture. Korea and Japan adopt writing systems and religious practices from China. Religion no longer shapes only personal belief. It shapes empires, laws, cultures, wars, and identities. The medieval world, 500 CE to 1500 CE, after Rome collapses. Europe transforms, not into darkness, but into a new, evolving world. Europe, after Rome, the early medieval period, sees fragmented kingdoms, Germanic tribes shaping new identities, the rise of feudalism, the spread of monastic education. The Catholic Church becomes the most stable institution in Europe, preserving knowledge and uniting fragmented cultures. The Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, continues for another 1,000 years, preserving Roman law, Greek culture, and Christian theology. Constantinople becomes one of the wealthiest cities on earth. Its influence reaches Europe, the Middle East, and Russia, until it finally falls in 1453. The Islamic Golden Age, from the 8th to the 14th centuries. The Islamic world leads global intellectual progress, hospitals, universities, scientific methodology, advances in mathematics, astronomy, geography, and medicine. They preserve Greek works that Europe will later rediscover. Africa's golden kingdoms. West Africa flourishes with empires like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, enriched by gold and trans-Saharan trade. Mansa Musa, the king of Mali, becomes the richest person in history. East Africa prospers through the Swahili coast, connecting Africa to India, Arabia, and China. The Tang and Song dynasties. China enters a golden era. Gunpowder, printing paper, money, compasses, porcelain. Urban life on a scale unseen elsewhere. China is the most advanced civilization during much of this era. Vikings and the transformation of Europe. Starting around 800 CE, Vikings explore, trade, raid, and settle across Europe. They reach North America centuries before Columbus. Their interactions help shape medieval England, France, and Russia. The Crusades. Christian and Muslim states fight over Jerusalem across 2 centuries. Despite brutality and religious motivations, the Crusades indirectly help reconnect Europe to the knowledge and trade networks of the East. The Mongol Empire, the largest land empire in history, 1206 to 1368, when Genghis Khan unifies the Mongol tribes, the world changes forever. The Mongol Empire expands at unprecedented speed, creating a vast trade network, the reopening of the Silk Road, exchange of technologies, goods, and ideas, the first significant Eurasian interconnected system under the Pax Mongolica. Merchants, scholars, and travelers like Marco Polo journey across continents. Though the Mongols were fierce conquerors, they also enabled global cultural and economic integration. The late medieval transformation, 1300 to 1500, the Black Death in the mid-1300s, plague devastates Eurasia. Up to 40% of Europe's population dies. But in its wake, labor shortages, wealth redistribution, and scientific inquiry transforms society. The Renaissance. Knowledge preserved by the Islamic world and Byzantines returns to Europe. Artists, thinkers, and inventors, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo Dante, spark a rebirth of science, art, and exploration. The dawn of global exploration by the 15th century. Improvements in navigation and shipbuilding prepare Europe for the age of discovery. Human civilization stands on the threshold of a new era, one defined by global connections, scientific revolutions, and the birth of the modern world. Modern civilization and the human future, 1500 CE to 2025 CE. Human civilization stands at the dawn of the year 1500, surrounded by ancient legacies, the philosophies of Greece, the religions of the Middle East and India, the technologies of China, and the cultural foundations of Africa and the Americas. But within a few centuries, humanity will experience the greatest acceleration in progress, conflict, population, communication, and technology ever seen. The period from 1500 to 2025 is the age in which the world becomes one world, connected, interdependent, and global. It is an era of breathtaking creativity and devastating violence, of empires rising and falling, of revolutions in thought, science, and industry. It is the story of how human civilization becomes modern and where it may go next. Let us begin. The Age of Exploration, 1400 to 1700. By the end of the Middle Ages, improvements in shipbuilding, navigation, and cartography set the stage for global exploration. European kingdoms, eager for spices, gold, and trade routes, begin to look beyond their borders. Portugal leads the way under Prince Henry the Navigator. Portugal explores the African coastline, eventually reaching India by sailing around the Cape of Good Hope. This sea route fundamentally changes world trade. Spain and the New World in 1492. Christopher Columbus reaches the Americas. From this moment on, two worlds, the old and new, become permanently linked. Soon after, Hernán Cortés conquers the Aztec Empire. Francisco Pizarro defeats the Inca Empire. Spanish colonies expand across Central and South America. Old World diseases devastate indigenous populations, altering the demographics of the Americas forever. A truly global system emerges by the 1600s. The Atlantic slave trade forces millions of Africans into the Americas. Sugar, tobacco, and later cotton plantations reshape global economies. European empires grow rich from global commerce. Indigenous cultures face colonization, resistance, and survival. Human history becomes global, interconnected by oceans, trade, and conflict. The scientific revolution 1500 to 1700, while explorers cross the oceans. Thinkers across Europe begin questioning the very nature of reality. Copernicus and Galileo, they challenge the geocentric worldview, proposing that Earth revolves around the sun. Galileo's telescope proves it, setting off a conflict between evidence and tradition. Isaac Newton's laws of motion and universal gravitation unify physics into a single system for the first time. This revolution unlocks predictable natural laws, modern engineering, scientific methodology. Humanity's mindset changes. No longer is knowledge only inherited from ancient texts or religious authority. It can be discovered, tested, and proven. Human civilization takes its first steps toward the modern scientific age. The Enlightenment and political revolutions, 1700 to 1800, new ideas begin to shape how societies view government, human rights, and freedom. Enlightenment thinkers John Locke argues for natural rights, Montesquieu proposes separation of powers. Voltaire promotes freedom of speech, Rousseau championed popular sovereignty. These ideas ignite political transformations. The American Revolution, 1776. 13 colonies break free from Britain and form a republic based on Enlightenment principles, creating a global symbol of democracy. The French Revolution, 1789. Economic crisis and social inequality spark an uprising that topples France's monarchy. The revolution proclaims liberty, equality, fraternity. Despite violence and turmoil, it reshapes politics worldwide. Revolutions spread throughout Latin America. Leaders like Simon Bolivar challenge European rule. In Haiti, enslaved Africans lead the first successful slave revolution, establishing the world's first black republic. The Enlightenment permanently alters human governance and rights. The Industrial Revolution, 1750-1900, perhaps the most important transformation in human history, begins in Britain. Machines replace muscle. Steam engines, textile mills, iron smelting innovations, railways, telegraphs, human labor, transportation, and communication change forever. Urbanization, millions move from farms to cities. Factories reshape family life, social class, education, labor, rights. The Great Divergence. Industrial nations, primarily in Europe and North America, grow enormously wealthy. Meanwhile, parts of Asia, Africa, and the Middle East face colonization and economic exploitation. Medical advances, vaccination, anesthesia, antiseptics, and germ theory save millions of lives and drastically increase life expectancy. The Industrial Revolution marks the birth of the modern world. Imperialism and global conflict, 1800-1945. With industrial power comes expansion and competition. European colonization. By 1900, much of Africa and Asia is under European control. Land, resources, and people become the foundation of expanding empires. World War I, 1914 to 1918, rival alliances, nationalism, and imperial tensions explode into global conflict. The war introduces tanks, poison, gas, air combat, trench warfare. Over 20 million die. Old empires collapse. Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, Russian. German, the Great Depression, 1929, economic collapse worldwide leads to instability, poverty, and political extremism. World War II, 1939 to 1945, the deadliest war in history erupts, driven by fascism, expansionism, and the unresolved tensions of WWI. It includes the Holocaust atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, massive civilian casualties, but it also results in the rise of the United States and Soviet Union as superpowers, the beginning of the atomic age. Human civilization enters a new phase of global geopolitics. The Cold War and the Technological Age, 1945 to 1990, the USA and USSR compete for influence, ideology, and technological dominance. Key events: Korean War, Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam War, space race, nuclear arms race, space exploration. In 1969, humans land on the moon, a defining moment of scientific achievement. Decolonization across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Colonies achieve independence. New nations are born, reclaiming cultural and political identity. Global organizations, the United Nations, World Bank, and international alliances form to maintain peace and promote development. The Digital Revolution, 1970 to 2025. If the Industrial Revolution transformed physical life, the digital revolution transforms mental and social life. Computing and the Internet. Personal computers, microprocessors, internet networks, smartphones. These create a globally connected society. Information explosion. Knowledge becomes instantly accessible. Social media enables communication across borders, but also misinformation and polarization. Economic transformation, automation, artificial intelligence, and digital finance reshape industries. New global powers rise, particularly in Asia, including China, South Korea, and India. Medicine and biotechnology, vaccines, gene editing, organ transplants, and advanced diagnostics extend life and improve health dramatically. Cultural interconnection, music, film, sports, and entertainment become global industries. Languages, ideas, and lifestyles blend across continents. Human civilization becomes the most interconnected it has ever been. Global challenges of the modern world. As humanity advances, new challenges emerge. Climate change, rising temperatures, extreme weather, melting ice, and habitat loss threaten ecosystems and human societies. Pandemics. COVID-19 demonstrates how quickly diseases can spread in a globalized world. Economic inequality. Wealth gaps between and within nations widen, creating social and political instability. Technological risks, artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, data control, and automation introduce ethical and existential questions. Yet, alongside these challenges, humanity also holds unprecedented tools for solving problems. The future of human civilization. While the future is uncertain, several powerful trends define humanity's trajectory. 1. Space exploration, Mars missions, lunar bases, and private spaceflight hint at humanity becoming a multi-planet species. 2. Artificial intelligence AI assists in medical, innovation, automation, climate science, education, communication, but also raises issues of ethics, bias, and control. 3. Renewable energy. Solar, wind, geothermal, and advanced batteries drive the transition away from fossil fuels. 4. Genetic medicine. CRISPR and gene therapies may eliminate inherited diseases and extend healthy lifespan. 5. Global unity or fragmentation. Humanity faces a crossroads. Cooperation on climate, technology, and peace or division through conflict, nationalism, and resource scarcity. The direction chosen will define the next chapter of civilization. The human story. a reflection from scattered bands of hunter-gatherers to global megacities, from stone tools to quantum computers, from tribal myths to global religions, from isolated continents to a connected planet. Human civilization has transformed in ways unimaginable to our earliest ancestors. Our story is one of curiosity, survival, creativity, adaptation, innovation, and above all, the ability to imagine something better and make it real. As we stand in 2025, the story of human civilization is still being written, and the next chapter, whether defined by cooperation, wisdom, and discovery, or by conflict and division, depends on the choices humanity makes today.